When BTS's Jimin made an unannounced visit to his old performing arts high school in Seoul, he expected only to revisit memories. But instead, he found Mr. Park, the very same janitor who, decades ago, had quietly protected him from bullies, still mopping the halls at the age of 80, despite constant knee pain and a humble salary. What started as a simple trip down memory lane would end up unearthing a shared past and lead to a decision that would touch countless lives. Because sometimes the most important people in our stories are those we hardly notice. Jimin stepped out of a discreet black van and gazed up at the Seoul School of Performing Arts. The building hadn't changed much in nearly 20 years. The same pale brick walls, the same tall windows, the same feeling of limitless possibility. For Jimin, memories surged back, both beautiful and painful. "We're running behind, Jimin," said Seokjin, his manager, checking his watch with a concerned look. "IB has you scheduled for a meeting at 4 o'clock, anything?" "We won't be long," Jimin replied softly. "I just want to walk around before the foundation announcement." Seokjin nodded and stepped aside to make a call while Jimin walked alone toward the main entrance. He hadn't told the school he was coming. He wanted no official greeting, no news cameras, just a private moment in the place where his dreams began to take shape. The doors were open, classes were over for the day, but the lights still glowed. Jimin stepped into the main hallway and was hit by the familiar scent of floor wax, old sheet music, and that distinctive school smell that never changes. For an instant, he was 16 again, burdened with dance bags and trying to avoid the classmates who mocked him for being too sensitive or too different. His footsteps echoed down the hall. There was his old music room. Up ahead, the library, where he used to hide during lunch when things were rough. He brushed his hand along the wall, feeling the tiny bumps in the paint. He turned toward the dance wing, his favorite place as a student, where his love for performance and teamwork first took root. Suddenly, he heard the soft squeak of a mop sliding across the floor. An elderly man was cleaning up what looked like a spilled drink, working slowly, his back bent with age. Something about his movements felt deeply familiar. Jimin stopped, watching quietly. The man wore the same gray uniform the janitors had worn when Jimin was a student. He finished cleaning, then with effort, straightened up. He must have been at least 80 years old. When the man turned, Jimin felt a jolt of recognition. "Mr. Park?" he asked before he could stop himself. The old man squinted, then his eyes opened wide in surprise. "Jimin," he replied, his voice raspier than Jimin remembered, but still carrying the same warmth. "Is that really you?" Jimin stepped forward, amazed. "It's me, Mr. Park, though I'm not so young anymore." Mr. Park leaned on his mop, a gentle smile spreading across his wrinkled face. "Maybe not so young, but I'd know those eyes anywhere, always looking at the world in a way others didn't." Jimin couldn't believe it. Mr. Park had been the janitor when he was a student, already old then. To see him still working after all these years was shocking. "You're still here?" Jimin asked softly. Mr. Park nodded. "Where else would I go? This place, it's my home." He gestured down the empty hallway. "It's been 52 years. I've watched many talented kids walk these halls." Jimin did the math. Mr. Park had been here even before he was born. "I've kept up with you," Mr. Park continued, pride in his eyes. "I tell the students I knew you back then. Some don't believe me." A lump rose in Jimin's throat. He remembered how Mr. Park would appear just when he needed someone most, always finding an excuse to clean nearby when things got tough. "You should be retired by now, enjoying life," Jimin commented gently. Mr. Park shrugged. "This is my joy. Young people, they keep me going. They keep me young here." He tapped his chest with a smile, though his body was failing. The school bell rang somewhere in the building. "That's the after-school club bell," Mr. Park said. "I need to finish the dance wing before the drama club comes." He started to walk away, but then paused, looking back at Jimin. "I'm glad to see you, Jimin. You've really done something wonderful with your life." That sight, an elderly man still working with hands twisted by arthritis and a back bent from years of cleaning, moved Jimin deeply. Mr. Park had devoted his entire life to this place and its students. "Mr. Park," Jimin called after him, "would you have time for a coffee? I'd really love to catch up." The old man looked surprised and smiled gently. Of course, for you. Just let me finish this hallway. 20 minutes? I'll wait, Jimin promised. He quickly texted Seokjin. Reschedule the meeting. Something important came up. The reply was quick. The company won't be happy. Jimin wrote back, I'll make it up later. This can't wait. He put away his phone and watched as Mr. Park continued to mop, making sure to reach every corner. The old man hummed a melody Jimin didn't recognize. Jimin's mind was already working. One of the world's most influential artists had just discovered that someone who'd quietly cared for him as a boy was still here, still working at 80. He had to do something. But first, he wanted to listen, to hear Mr. Park's story, to thank him for those quiet acts of kindness that had meant everything to a lonely teenager. Leaning against the wall, Jimin waited, thinking about the boy he once was and about the quiet strength of Mr. Park, the man who'd never wasted a moment's energy but always gave just enough. This is what I wanted to show you, Mr. Park said, handing a heavy old book to Jimin. Jimin took it carefully. The cover was worn and soft with age. My memoir, Mr. Park explained. Open it. Jimin sat at the small desk, opening the book. The yellowed pages were filled with neat handwriting. Each entry dated, telling little stories, some with old newspaper clippings or faded photos glued in. What is all this? Jimin asked, gently flipping through the pages. My students, Mr. Park answered simply. Not all of them, just the ones who needed something extra, the ones I tried to help. Jimin began reading. 09/15/1981. A red-haired girl teased for her stutter. I found her crying on the stairwell. Told her about my cousin, who also stuttered but became a well-known radio host. Left her a book about overcoming speech problems. Saw her reading it at lunch. She smiled at me. 03/03/1986. Boy whose father died last month. Came back to school today, trying to be brave. Found him hiding behind the music room. Asked him to help me move old speakers so he'd have something to do. He left a bit lighter after talking about his dad. Jimin kept turning the pages, amazed by the details and the sheer number of years. 52 years of silent kindness, all recorded in that simple book. You kept track of all these students? Jimin asked, looking at Mr. Park in awe. Mr. Park nodded. I never wrote their names, it didn't seem right. Just their stories. Sometimes I wrote a note about how they were doing, if I ever heard. Jimin kept turning pages until he reached the late 2000s, his own school years. His heart raced as he found an entry from that time. 12/06/2011. Quiet boy who loves to dance. The older kids took his dance shoes again, found them in the trash, and cleaned them before giving them back. He works hard on his choreography. Stays late to practice. His mind works differently. Teachers don't always get it. But I think he could change the world, if they'd just let him be himself. Jimin felt a lump in his throat. Mr. Park had seen it, even back then. He continued reading entries about himself. 11/08/2011. Dance studio. Found him asleep on the floor at midnight, exhausted from practice. Walked him home. He talked the whole way about performing and expressing himself through music. His energy is inspiring. 01/20/2012. Bullied again. I started mopping near the practice room during lunch. The bullies kept away when I was there. Brought him warm tea while he worked on his routine. He always thanked me, even when lost in his thoughts. Jimin closed the book carefully, overwhelmed by what he'd read. You did this for all of us, he said quietly. All these years. Mr. Park shrugged. It's nothing special. Just little things. Just being present. Yes, it is special, Jimin insisted. For some of us, maybe you were the only one who ever noticed or cared. The school has good teachers, Mr. Park said loyally. Teachers focus on tests and performances. I focused on the moments in between. Jimin handed back the book, which Mr. Park held like a treasure. Why did you stay here all these years? Jimin asked softly. You could have done other jobs, maybe earned more. Mr. Park ran his hand over the leather cover of the book. Here I found my purpose, watching young people grow, being the person I needed when I was young. And, he smiled, I'm not bad at cleaning floors. Jimin laughed quietly, but his mind was racing. He thought about all the big projects and dreams he'd had, all the ways Mr. Park had made a difference, with just a mop, kind words, and a willingness to notice the unnoticed. Show me the rest of the school, Jimin said. The places that matter to you. Mr. Park looked surprised, then pleased. You have time for that? Jimin checked his phone. I have 4 hours before my next schedule. I want to see the school through your eyes. Mr. Park put his book back on the shelf. Then let me show you the real Cycle Performing Arts High, the parts no one else ever really notices. They left that tiny office. Jimin had already made a decision. Something had to change. He didn't know exactly how yet, but he knew he would make it happen. For the next 2 hours, Mr. Park showed Jimin every corner of the school. They walked slowly at the old man's pace. He pointed out hidden nooks, secret messages scratched on walls, places where generations of students had left their mark. The music room windowsill, worn smooth. That's where the shy kids always sit. By the window, Mr. Park said. It's a different kid every year, but always the same spot. Jimin touched the familiar wood. I used to sit right here for music theory. Mr. Park nodded. I remember polishing that ledge while listening to you hum, always deep in thought. As they walked, Jimin noticed the way Mr. Park sometimes winced, rubbing his knee. Does your knee hurt? Jimin asked gently. Mr. Park nodded, making no attempt to hide it. An old injury from my army days. It's only gotten worse. Have you seen a doctor? Jimin asked, concern clear in his voice. Mr. Park gave a tired smile. A visit to the doctor costs money. The school's insurance is only for simple things, not for surgery. Jimin stopped walking. You need a knee replacement? Mr. Park nodded again. That's what they told me 5 years ago. Even with insurance, my share of the cost is more than I make in a year. You live with pain like this, Jimin said, not hiding his shock. You get used to it, Mr. Park replied. When it's bad, I take medicine. They finished their tour in silence. Jimin's mind was racing, already planning. When they sat on a bench by the practice hall, Jimin said, Can I ask, do you have plans for retirement? Mr. Park's face grew serious. Work as long as I can. Pension isn't enough. Not with rent, medicine, food. But you can't work forever. What about your apartment? Jimin asked. Would you have to sell it? Mr. Park gave a little laugh. There's nothing to sell. I've rented the same room for 30 years. The rent always goes up, but my pay never really does. Jimin was shaken, realizing how tough things truly were. And savings? Mr. Park looked at his hands. My wife's illness used it all up. Every penny was worth it. Then I helped my son start his new life, paid for my grandson's braces. Life uses up money quickly. Jimin nodded, heart heavy. If you could do anything here, besides cleaning, what would you want? Jimin asked. Without hesitation, Mr. Park's eyes lit up. I'd teach the kids practical skills, how to fix things, use tools, solve real-life problems. So many of these kids can ace exams, but can't change a light bulb. That matters too. Jimin checked the time, regretful. I have to go to my meeting now, but I want to come back, maybe next week. You're always welcome here, Mr. Park replied. But someone as busy as you has better things to do than visit an old janitor. Not really, Jimin said, totally sincere. This has been the most meaningful day I've had in a long time. Mr. Park looked embarrassed but also happy. You always were a little different, Jimin, in the best way. As Jimin stood to leave, Mr. Park struggled to his feet, gritting his teeth. Without thinking, Jimin reached out to help him. Mr. Park's hand was rough and calloused, but still strong. Thank you for today, Jimin said quietly, for everything. Come back anytime, Mr. Park replied. I still have stories to tell you. Jimin left the school, his head full of ideas and his heart heavy, but for the first time, strangely hopeful. As his car pulled away from the building, he looked back, thinking about Mr. Park, still working, still giving. Jimin clenched his jaw in determination. He called his manager. I need all the information you can get on the school staff, salaries, pensions, and especially Mr. Park. and find out the costs for knee replacement surgery at the best hospitals. Also, see if there are any programs for training or supporting school staff. This is urgent. As the city blurred past the window, Jimin thought about Mr. Park's little office, the old book full of silent kindness, and the pain behind the old man's eyes. He knew the answer wouldn't be just about money. Mr. Park wouldn't want charity. Any help had to come with dignity and purpose, letting Mr. Park keep making a difference for others. That night, Jimin took out his own notebook and began to plan the next step. When the sun rose, he knew exactly what to do. He'd return to the school in 3 weeks, and this time, he wouldn't just bring questions. He'd bring a solution. Jimin smiled as he approached Mr. Park. "I didn't think you would actually come back," Mr. Park said softly, surprised. "I promised you, didn't I?" Jimin replied warmly. He introduced his team quietly. "They'll speak with the school principal while you and I talk, if that's okay." Mr. Park looked curious, even a bit suspicious. "What do you really want to talk about?" "I want you to show me more of the school," Jimin said gently. "The places that need the most attention. The corners people always forget." Mr. Park raised an eyebrow. "A guided tour of all the school's problems?" "Exactly," Jimin replied, smiling. "No one knows them better than you." For the next hour, Mr. Park led Jimin through the school, pointing out problems that had built up over decades. Leaky roofs, old wiring, weak heating, broken equipment. In the science room, he explained, "These lab sinks haven't worked since 2009. I keep them running with parts I buy myself, but they really need replacing." Jimin pointed at a makeshift shelf in the music room. "What about this?" "I built it after the 2011 earthquake," Mr. Park said proudly. "We lost the original shelves, and there was no budget for new ones, so I recycled old desks." No one saw how much creativity and dedication Mr. Park had given. Not only had he cleaned the school for over 50 years, he'd held it together too. They finished in the workshop, a bright room full of tools and half-finished projects. Unlike the rest of the building, this place was neat and organized. "This is my favorite place," Mr. Park admitted. "The woodworking teacher lets me use it on weekends. I've made furniture for the teachers, repaired things for the students. Working with your hands is good for the soul." Jimin looked around in awe. "You know so much about how this place works, the systems, the people." "After 50 years, you pick up a few things," Mr. Park replied with a small shrug. "If you could change anything, what would it be?" Jimin asked. Mr. Park paused, thinking. "I'd make sure every student learned practical skills, not just theory. How to fix things, build things. See that broken chair? A student broke it yesterday. When I was young, we'd have to fix things ourselves. Now they just throw them away." Jimin took notes on his phone, listening. "I'd make the building more comfortable too. Better lighting, quieter study rooms, smooth floors for wheelchairs." He seemed a little embarrassed by his passion. "I've had years to think about this stuff. I just notice things others don't." "You see problems nobody else does," Jimin said quietly. Mr. Park glanced down at his uniform. "When you wear this, you become invisible. You see what others don't." "It's not invisible," Jimin said firmly. "It's essential. This school wouldn't run without you." Mr. Park smiled shyly, uncomfortable at the praise. "I should get back to work. Still have to mop the hall. Actually, I was hoping you'd come with me to meet the principal. I want to discuss something together." Mr. Park hesitated, glancing at his work clothes. "I'm not dressed for meetings." "It's perfect just the way it is," Jimin reassured him. "This meeting is for you." Mr. Park frowned, clearly confused. "Why me?" "Because I want to propose something," Jimin said, his voice sincere. "Something I think will help you, the school, and future generations." Mr. Park looked at him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I trusted you with the keys to this building when you were 16. I guess I can trust you now." They walked to the principal's office together, Jimin matching his pace to Mr. Park's slow steps and aching knees. Inside, the school principal and a few others were already seated, surprised to see Mr. Park. "Mr. Park, I didn't know you'd be joining us," the principal said. "Actually," Jimin explained, "Mr. Park is the main reason for this meeting." Mr. Park hesitated, uncomfortable as all eyes turned to him. Jimin pulled a chair closer so he could sit. First, Jimin began, I want to thank you, Principal, for seeing us. What I'm about to propose will need the school's cooperation. The principal nodded, interested. My interest was rekindled by a chance encounter 3 weeks ago, Jimin said, glancing at Mr. Park. I discovered my old janitor was still here at 80 years old. But what really surprised me was realizing how many lives he's touched and how he's kept this school going for decades. I had no idea you kept all those stories, Jimin said to Mr. Park, surprised. Only for myself, to remember, Mr. Park replied quietly. Today, Mr. Park showed me the real school, the problems that need to be fixed, the systems that need updating. But most importantly, he showed me his vision for the students, learning practical life skills alongside their classes. Jimin took a folder from his manager and opened it. That's why I'm creating the Park Foundation with an initial donation of $50 million. The room fell silent. Mr. Park stared at Jimin in shock. The foundation will have several missions, Jimin continued, growing more passionate. First, to recognize and support the invisible heroes of education, the janitors, the cooks, the bus drivers, everyone who keeps schools running but rarely gets recognition or fair pay. He handed a document to the principal. The foundation will begin by funding a complete renovation of this school, fixing every issue Mr. Park identified today. The principal scanned the document, stunned. This is incredibly generous, Jimin. But there's more? Jimin smiled at Mr. Park. There's more. The foundation will also create a new position at this school and eventually others. It's called Master of Practical Life, combining building maintenance with mentoring students. Mr. Park, I want you to be the first to hold that role. Mr. Park's face trembled. But my knees? The job includes full medical care, Jimin assured him gently, including surgery to fix your knees, and your salary will be triple what you get now. Mr. Park's eyes filled with tears. I don't know what to say. Just say you'll think about it, Jimin said with a smile. You can focus on teaching and mentoring, not the heavy work. When you're ready to retire, your pension will be based on your new salary, not your janitor's pay. The principal looked over the papers again. This is an incredible opportunity, Mr. Park, for you and the school. Mr. Park dabbed at his eyes, voice shaking. Why would you do this for me? Because, Jimin said, you saw me when I needed it most. You saw hundreds of kids that no one else saw. I'm just returning the favor. Jimin's manager slid another document across the table. And there's something else, Mr. Park. The foundation will pay for your son and grandchildren to visit from Australia next month, and every time you want to see them after that, we'll make sure you can. Mr. Park covered his face, shoulders shaking, silent for a long moment. Then he looked up, eyes red but determined. I accept, Jimin, but only if I can keep cleaning this hallway. I've been mopping that floor for 50 years. I can't give it up completely. Jimin laughed, a mix of relief and joy. Deal. You can clean any hall you want, but only after we fix your knees. The principal shook Mr. Park's hand. Congratulations, Mr. Park. Or should I say, Master Park. As they left the meeting, Mr. Park turned to Jimin. There's something else I want to show you. It's in my office. Something I've kept for a long time. What is it? Jimin asked. Something you made. Something you threw away, thinking it was a failure. But I kept it because I saw its potential. Jimin was intrigued. Show me, Mr. Master. Mr. Park led Jimin to his small office near the boiler room. He pulled out a wrapped, yellowed package from a filing cabinet. Inside were pages of worn music sheets, scribbled choreography notes, and a lyric notebook from Jimin's student days. You threw these out. I found them in the trash, Mr. Park explained. I knew you were working on something important, even if you didn't see it then. Jimin flipped through the old papers, stunned. Some early dance formations, a rough draft of a song chorus, half-finished lyrics he'd long forgotten. Why did you save all this? Mr. Park smiled. I saved the things students throw away, drawings, poems, lyrics. Sometimes the creator can't see their own worth. Jimin looked at the music again. A few lines matched songs that would later become hits for BTS. This is amazing, he whispered. Some of these ideas ended up in our real work. I was dreaming big, even as a teenager. Mr. Park nodded. They're yours, Jimin. I only kept them safe. Jimin smiled at the old man, seeing in his face the same kindness and wisdom that had carried him all these years. You've protected a lot, not just papers and rooms, but people too, Jimin said quietly. I just did what was right, Mr. Park replied. And that's rare, Jimin said, carefully wrapping the papers again. Thank you for saving them and for everything else. Mr. Park blushed. Maybe now you'll believe me when I say I always knew you'd do important things. As they left the office, Jimin felt life had come full circle. The quiet boy who once dreamed big was now able to help others fulfill their dreams. And the silent janitor who protected him would finally be honored, healed, and seen. As they walked down the hallway, Mr. Park whispered, I still can't believe it. Tomorrow I might wake up and think it was a dream. It's real, Jimin promised. Your knees will be fixed, your family will visit, and students will learn from you for years to come. Mr. Park stopped, tears shining in his eyes. You know what moves me most? That someone finally saw what I did. Mr. Park looked at Jimin, his eyes full of gratitude. What I did all these years. That it mattered? It mattered more than you can imagine, Jimin answered firmly. 2 months passed. During that time, Mr. Park underwent surgery on both knees. The operations were a success, and for the first time in years, he could walk without pain. The school buzzed with rumors about changes, about Jimin's visits, and about the mysterious absence of the elderly janitor, who now had a new title. One sunny Tuesday morning, students and teachers filled the school auditorium, murmuring with excitement. A stage was set for special guests, and press vehicles waited outside. The principal took the microphone. Today is a historic day for Seoul Performing Arts High, she announced. We are honored to welcome back our distinguished alumnus, Park Jimin, who has an important announcement to share. Jimin walked on stage to thunderous applause, dressed in a simple dark suit, looking more serious than usual. He greeted the principal and turned to the crowd. Good morning. Many of you know me as a member of BTS. Some of you know that years ago I was a student here, but today I'm not here to talk about myself. I'm here to talk about someone much more important to this school than I have ever been. He turned to the side of the stage where Mr. Park waited. I'd like to introduce Mr. Park Sung-hoon. Mr. Park stepped onto the stage, walking confidently in a new suit, no longer the custodian's uniform. Some students recognized him, others just watched, curious. For over 50 years, Mr. Park had been the heart of the school. As head of maintenance, he kept the building running, but he did much more. He protected bullied students, encouraged those who struggled, and fixed not just things, but people. Mr. Park looked down, humble as Jimin spoke. Today, I am proud to announce the creation of the Park Foundation with an initial fund of $50 million. The audience gasped. Cameras flashed. The foundation will support the invisible heroes of education, the janitors, the cooks, the support staff who keep schools running, but who rarely get recognition or a living wage. It will help raise salaries, provide training, and honor support staff across Korea and eventually the world. And here at Seoul Performing Arts High, we will start by completely renovating the Arts and Science Wing, which will be renamed the Park Innovation Center. More applause. Mr. Park's eyes went wide in disbelief. He hadn't known about that part. At the head of this new center, Jimin continued, will be the first ever master of practical life, Mr. Park Sung-hoon, who will teach students real-world skills and problem-solving based on all his experience. The applause grew. Mr. Park looked overwhelmed, eyes shining with emotion. Jimin beckoned him to the microphone. I'm not good at speeches, Mr. Park said, voice trembling. I've spent my life in the background, just doing my job. But this school has been my home for over 50 years. The students have been my family. I've seen thousands of young people grow. I've watched you struggle and succeed. If I've learned one thing, it's that everyone has value. Everyone deserves to be seen. The auditorium was silent. Even the most restless students were listening closely. Thank you, Jimin, for seeing me, Mr. Park concluded, and thank you all for letting me be a part of your lives. The applause lasted nearly 5 minutes. Reporters rushed forward with questions about the foundation, the renovation, and this unusual partnership between an idol and a janitor. Jimin stayed close to Mr. Park, making sure he wasn't overwhelmed and that this was truly his moment. As the crowd began to disperse, Mr. Park turned to Jimin. "Why name it after me? You could have chosen anything." Jimin smiled. "Because names matter, and yours deserves to be remembered." Mr. Park nodded, touched. "I remember a student from about 15 years ago. He was angry, always in fights. One day I found him alone behind the gym with a bottle of those pills. I sat with him for 2 hours just talking. I called the counselor. That boy is a doctor now. He sends me a card every Christmas." The reporters listening were moved by the simplicity and power of the story. "And there are many more like him," Jimin added. "Mr. Park has helped hundreds. Many are recorded in his memoir. He's not alone. There are people like him in schools everywhere, making a difference that doesn't show up on tests, but does save lives." A reporter raised her hand. "Jimin, what exactly will the Park Foundation do?" "First, we'll study these relationships," Jimin replied. "We'll find best practices and create programs to strengthen the bond between students and support staff. We'll also fight for better pay, training, and recognition for these essential workers." He showed a chart on his tablet. Most school staff barely earn enough to get by. Many have second jobs, and after decades retire in poverty. The foundation will also push for public policy changes to correct this injustice. "And the renovation?" another reporter asked. "The Park Innovation Center will be a model for what educational spaces should be," Jimin said, voice rising with excitement. "Labs where students can build robots and solar cars, workshops where they learn to fix things instead of throwing them away, spaces that combine academic learning with practical skills." Mr. Park approached the microphone, calm but confident. "If I may add something, in my 50 years here, I've seen the education change. Today's students know more facts than ever, but many don't know how to solve simple problems with their hands. This new center will help close that gap." As the press conference went on, students crept to the edge of the room, taking photos and looking at Mr. Park with admiration he had never seen before. Suddenly, a brave student called out, "Mr. Park, will you teach us to build robots like Jimin?" The old janitor smiled. "I'll teach you how to use tools and solve problems. What you build and where you go, that's up to you." Afterward, when the reporters had left, Jimin and Mr. Park sat together in the principal's office, enjoying a rare moment of calm. "It's a lot to take in," Mr. Park confessed, still dazed. "Not too much, I hope?" Jimin asked, a little worried. Mr. Park shook his head. "Not too much, just different. I've spent my life in silence, and now suddenly, everyone wants to hear my story." "You should have been heard long ago," Jimin said. "That's what this is all about, listening to those who have always been ignored." Mr. Park nodded. "My wife would have loved this. She always said schools should value everyone who works in them, not just the teachers or the stars." "She sounds wise," Jimin said. "The wisest person I've ever known," Mr. Park replied. He looked at Jimin, curiosity in his eyes. "What made you do all this? The foundation? The center?" Jimin thought. "When I found you still cleaning floors at 80, your knees destroyed. At first, I was angry. It seemed unfair, but I realized being angry isn't enough. You have to act. So I tried to fix not just your situation, but the whole system." Mr. Park smiled. "You always thought big, Jimin." "I learned from the best," Jimin replied, smiling back. "You taught me to notice the problems no one else did, to fix what others gave up on." Mr. Park looked at him, surprised. "Every day?" "Every single day," Jimin assured him. "Just by doing your job, as you always did." From outside, they could hear the excited voices of students talking about the day's announcement. The news had spread beyond the school. Something big had happened, something that would change lives, starting with one janitor who thought his best days were behind him. How wrong he had been. A young student proudly explained to the crowd, "Mr. Park showed us how to use tools the right way and how to break down a big problem into simple steps. That's how we built this project." Jimin watched with pride. These were exactly the practical skills he dreamed of bringing to the new center. When the student demonstrations were finished, Jimin returned to the microphone. Today I have one last announcement, something even Mr. Park doesn't know yet. Mr. Park looked up, surprised. A few months ago, when I visited Mr. Park's office, he gave me something extraordinary. Some old lyric sheets, choreography notes, and music sketches that I wrote as a teenager here. Things I'd long forgotten, things I actually threw away. He lifted the now preserved framed notebook for the whole auditorium to see. Mr. Park held on to these for over 40 years. At the time, I didn't realize how meaningful those ideas were. But when I looked at them again, I saw that some of the moves and lyrics actually became part of BTS's earliest songs and performances. Our team studied them, and some of those original ideas inspired an entirely new direction in our music and production. The crowd murmured in awe. The result was a song and even a new production method. That's now a key part of what we do, Jimin said. And as the legal creator of the original concept, I've decided that Mr. Park, who recognized the value and protected these dreams, will receive 50% of all royalties generated by any BTS projects that use these ideas. The auditorium erupted with gasps and applause. Mr. Park stood frozen in shock. Our estimates say that amount will reach several $million over the next decade, Jimin added as camera flashes lit up Mr. Park's astonished face. He turned to him and said gently, "You took care of my dreams until I was finally ready to fulfill them. It's only right that I share that success with you." Mr. Park shook his head, still unable to believe it. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," Jimin replied, squeezing his hand as the crowd applauded. After the ceremony, as people toured the new Park Innovation Center and chatted excitedly, Mr. Park led Jimin to a quiet corner. "There's something I must tell you," Mr. Park whispered, his face serious. "Something I've kept secret for over 40 years." Jimin looked at him, curious. Mr. Park leaned in and whispered something into Jimin's ear. Words no one else could hear. Jimin's eyes widened in disbelief. "Is it true?" he asked softly. Mr. Park nodded, a little sadly but with relief. "I always wanted to tell you, but the time never felt right. Now, after all you've accomplished, you deserve to know." Jimin stood silent, processing a revelation that changed everything he thought he knew about his past, and about the man who had been so much more than just a school janitor, a guardian, a mentor, and now family in a way he had never imagined. One final truth, kept safe for decades, more valuable than any fortune. For now, that secret would belong only to the two of them. Thank you for joining me in this emotional story about recognition, kindness, and the profound impact that one person can have on another's life. Wherever you are listening from today, tell me in the comments if this story touched your heart. Don't forget to hit like so that more people can receive this message of hope and kindness. Never underestimate the power of a small act of kindness, just as Mr. Park did for young Jimin. And if you enjoyed this story, don't miss the next video on your screen, another inspiring tale that's sure to move you too. Click, and I'll see you there.